When Sebastian Whitmore's luxury car broke down in the projects, his first instinct was terror. But the 73-year-old black grandmother who opened her door would teach him that safety doesn't come from money. It comes from love. Before starting the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The rain hammered against the tinted windows of the Mercedes-Benz as 12-year-old Sebastian Whitmore pressed his face to the glass. He had never been on this side of Manhattan before. The gleaming towers of his Upper East Side world had given way to crumbling buildings and broken sidewalks. Master Sebastian, James, the family driver, called from the front seat. "I'm sorry, but we're going to be late for your violin lesson. This detour is taking longer than expected." Sebastian nodded, not really listening. His father, Charles Whitmore III, CEO of a $3.2 billion pharmaceutical empire, had always warned him about dangerous neighborhoods like this one, places where people like us didn't belong. That's when the Mercedes made a grinding noise and died. "What's happening?" Sebastian asked, panic creeping into his voice. James tried the ignition. Nothing. "Sir, I need to look under the hood. Please stay in the car with the doors locked." But as James stepped outside, Sebastian saw something that terrified him. A group of teenagers had gathered on the corner, pointing at their expensive car. In his 12-year-old imagination, every glance looked threatening. When James lifted the hood, Sebastian made a decision that would change his life forever. He quietly slipped out the passenger door and ran. Within minutes, Sebastian was completely lost. The rain soaked through his expensive school uniform as he stumbled down unfamiliar streets. His leather shoes provided no grip on wet pavement. Every sound made him jump. Every person made him nervous. He had no idea how to survive alone on city streets. In his privileged world, there were always adults handling everything. Security guards, drivers, assistants. Now he was just a scared kid in a strange place. That's when he saw her. Eleanor Washington was walking slowly down the sidewalk, carrying groceries and an umbrella. At 73, she moved with the steady dignity of someone who had raised 6 children in these same housing projects for over 40 years. "Excuse me," Sebastian called out, his voice shaking. Eleanor stopped and looked at the boy. In all her years in the neighborhood, she had never seen a child who so obviously didn't belong. His expensive uniform was soaked, his perfect haircut was dripping wet, and he looked absolutely terrified. "Baby, what are you doing out here in this rain?" Eleanor asked with the warm authority of someone who had helped raise 14 grandchildren. "I'm lost," Sebastian admitted. "My car broke down and I got scared and ran away." Eleanor studied him carefully. Everything about this boy screamed wealth and privilege, but none of that mattered. What she saw was a frightened child who needed help. "You can't stand out here getting pneumonia," Eleanor said. "Come on up to my apartment. We'll get you dried off and call your people." Sebastian hesitated. Every security lesson screamed that he shouldn't go anywhere with strangers, but looking into Eleanor's kind eyes, something deeper than fear responded. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Baby, I'm sure," Eleanor replied, already heading toward her building. Eleanor's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that looked nothing like Sebastian's world. The elevator was small and old, the hallways narrow and dim. But when Eleanor opened her door, Sebastian stepped into something extraordinary. The apartment was tiny, smaller than his bedroom at home, but every surface was covered with family photos spanning decades. Children, graduates, weddings, babies. The furniture was old but comfortable, chosen for love, not style. The kitchen barely fit 2 people, but it smelled like something wonderful was cooking. "Sit right there," Eleanor said, pointing to a worn armchair. "Let me get you some dry clothes." She returned with towels and clothes belonging to one of her teenage grandsons, simple jeans and a t-shirt. It was the first time Sebastian had ever worn discount store clothing, but it felt surprisingly comfortable. "Here's some hot chocolate," Eleanor said, handing him a mug. "Now tell me about yourself, baby. What's your name?" Sebastian found himself telling Eleanor everything. About his family's wealth, his fears of the neighborhood, his panic when he thought he saw threatening people. He expected her to be impressed by his status or resentful of his privilege. Instead, she just listened with genuine care. You were scared, Eleanor said when he finished. That's natural. When we don't know a place, our imagination can make everything seem dangerous. Isn't this a dangerous neighborhood? Sebastian asked. Eleanor smiled gently. Baby, there are good people and troubled people everywhere. The difference isn't the people, it's the opportunities they have. As if to prove her point, there was a knock at the door. A neighbor appeared with a plate of food. Mrs. Washington, I made extra rice and beans. Thought you might like some, the woman said. She noticed Sebastian and smiled warmly. Oh, hello there. I'm Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall. After she left, Sebastian stared at Eleanor in confusion. She just gave you food? For free? That's what neighbors do, Eleanor explained. When you don't have much, you share what you can. We take care of each other. This was completely foreign to Sebastian. In his world, relationships were often transactional. The idea of a community helping each other simply because they were neighbors was revolutionary. We should call your family, Eleanor said. Sebastian gave her his father's number, but it went to voicemail. Charles Whitmore was in an emergency board meeting. They tried James, who answered immediately. Master Sebastian, thank God. Where are you? Sebastian described Eleanor's building, and James said he'd be there in 15 minutes. But as they waited, Eleanor did something no adult in Sebastian's world had ever done. She asked about his life because she genuinely cared about him as a person. What's your favorite subject in school? Eleanor asked. I'm supposed to say mathematics, Sebastian replied automatically, but I actually love music. I play violin. What do you love about it? Sebastian paused. No adult had ever asked him that. It makes me feel connected to something bigger than myself, like everything makes sense. That sounds beautiful. Do you get to play for fun? Mostly just lessons and performances for my father's business dinners. He says music is good for education, but not practical as a career. What would you do if you could choose anything? Eleanor asked. Sebastian had never been asked this question by an adult who seemed genuinely interested in his answer. I'd like to teach music to kids who don't usually get lessons, he said quietly. I saw a documentary about children in poor neighborhoods learning classical music, and they look so happy. That sounds like a wonderful dream, Eleanor said. Don't let anyone tell you that bringing joy to children isn't important. When James arrived, Sebastian almost didn't want to leave. For the first time in his life, he felt valued for who he was rather than what his family owned. Thank you, Sebastian said as he prepared to go. For everything. Eleanor hugged him gently. You don't need to thank me for kindness, baby. That's just how people should treat each other. Mrs. Washington, could I visit you again? Eleanor's smile lit up the room. You're welcome any time, Sebastian. You're family now. The ride home was quiet. Sebastian couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's warmth, the community's kindness, the feeling of belonging he'd experienced. When they reached the penthouse, Charles Whitmore was pacing frantically. The moment Sebastian walked in, Charles embraced him tighter than he had in months. Thank God you're safe, Charles said. I was terrified. I'm fine, Dad, Sebastian replied, and Charles noticed something different in his son's voice, a calmness, a maturity that hadn't been there that morning. James told me you were helped by a woman in the projects. That must have been frightening. It wasn't frightening at all, Sebastian said, surprising his father. Mrs. Washington was really kind. She made me feel safe. Charles studied his son. Sebastian was wearing clothes that clearly didn't belong to him, but more than his appearance had changed. There was a confidence and contentment Charles had never seen before. Sebastian, you need to understand. What happened was dangerous. You were in an unpredictable environment with people we don't know. Why is that automatically dangerous? Sebastian asked directly. Because people in those situations might try to take advantage of our resources. Sebastian shook his head. Mrs. Washington didn't want anything from us. She helped me because I needed help. She didn't even know who we were. You're too young to understand. I'm not too young to understand kindness, Sebastian interrupted firmly. Mrs. Washington treated me better in 3 hours than most people in our world treat me all day. The words hit Charles like a punch. What do you mean? She asked what I thought about things. She listened to my answers. She cared about what I wanted, not just what I was supposed to want. She made me feel like I mattered as a person. Charles realized that in preparing Sebastian for wealth and responsibility, he had somehow failed to make his son feel valued for who he was. That night, Charles couldn't concentrate on his business crisis. He kept thinking about Sebastian's description of the housing projects, about a 73-year-old woman who had shown his son genuine kindness. The next morning, Charles made a surprising decision. "James, I want you to drive Sebastian and me to visit Mrs. Washington." "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I want to thank this woman personally." The drive to the projects was Charles's first venture into that neighborhood in 20 years. As their Mercedes navigated the unfamiliar streets, Charles felt many of the same emotions Sebastian had, discomfort and fear based more on prejudice than reality. When Eleanor opened her door, she greeted Sebastian like family. "Sebastian, baby, I hoped you'd come back. Mrs. Washington, this is my father, Charles Whitmore." Charles had prepared a formal speech, but looking into Eleanor's kind eyes, the words disappeared. "Mrs. Washington, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for Sebastian." "Any decent person would have done the same," Eleanor replied. "Please, come in." As Charles entered Eleanor's apartment, he experienced the same culture shock his son had felt. Everything spoke of a life lived on a different economic level, but it radiated genuine warmth his penthouse had never achieved. "Would you like coffee?" Eleanor asked. "Thank you," Charles replied, studying the family photos covering every surface. "Sebastian tells me you have a large family," Charles said. 6 children, 14 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren, Eleanor said proudly. "This apartment has been home to 4 generations, not much space, but plenty of love." Charles found himself genuinely curious. "Where are they now?" "All over. My son David is a high school principal in Philadelphia. My daughter Marie is a nurse in Atlanta. My son Jerome owns a construction company here. They all turned out good, even without much money." Charles noticed the contrast between Eleanor's obvious pride in her children's character and his own focus on Sebastian's future business responsibilities rather than present happiness. "Sebastian told me about his interest in music," Charles said carefully. "You encouraged him to think about teaching children." "That boy has a beautiful heart," Eleanor said, looking at Sebastian with genuine affection. "He lit up talking about bringing music to children who don't get those opportunities. That's a gift. In our world, there are expectations about career paths, about building on family achievements." Eleanor studied Charles with knowing eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, can I ask you something? When you were Sebastian's age, what did you dream of doing?" The question caught Charles completely off guard. "I wanted to be a marine biologist. I was fascinated by underwater exploration." "What happened to that dream?" "I had responsibilities, family expectations, a business to inherit." "And are you happy?" Eleanor asked simply. Charles opened his mouth to give the standard response about success and achievement, but looking into Eleanor's eyes, the automatic answers wouldn't come. "I'm successful," he said finally. "That's not what I asked," Eleanor replied gently. The silence was heavy. Sebastian watched his father struggle with a question that had probably never been asked in their family. "Sebastian," Eleanor said, "tell your father about the children you saw playing yesterday." "They were amazing, Dad," Sebastian said, lighting up. "There was a girl teaching younger kids to jump rope, a boy fixing someone's bike. They were all taking care of each other." "They don't have much," Eleanor told Charles, "but they understand that happiness comes from connection, from helping each other, from using your gifts to make other people's lives better." Charles felt something shifting inside him. His focus on business success had somehow cost him the genuine relationships and satisfaction that seemed natural in Eleanor's world. "Would it be possible for Sebastian to visit again?" Charles asked. "I think he learned something here he's not getting elsewhere." Eleanor smiled, then grew serious. "Sebastian's welcome any time. But if I may say so, the person who most needs to learn what this neighborhood teaches isn't Sebastian." Charles understood exactly what she meant. Over the next months, the Whitmore family's routine changed completely. Every Saturday, Charles and Sebastian visited Eleanor. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they helped with tasks, sometimes they joined community activities. Charles discovered that the dangerous neighborhood was actually a tight-knit community where people looked out for each other with dedication he'd never experienced. Children played safely under multiple watchful adults. Teenagers helped elderly residents. Neighbors shared food, tools, childcare, and support. Most importantly, Charles realized that Eleanor's kindness wasn't exceptional. It was the community standard. People helped each other not for reward, but because mutual aid was simply how they survived and thrived despite economic challenges. "You know what I've realized," Charles told Eleanor during one visit. "I spent my life trying to protect Sebastian from the world, but you taught him how to engage with it in a way that makes him stronger and more compassionate." Eleanor nodded. Children need roots and wings, roots so they know what they stand for, wings so they can fly toward their purpose. That afternoon, Sebastian played violin for neighborhood children in the courtyard. Charles watched from Eleanor's window as kids gathered around his son, mesmerized by music they'd never heard live. Sebastian's face was radiant with joy, happier than Charles had ever seen him. "He wants to start a music program," Charles said. "Free violin lessons for underserved communities." "What do you think?" Eleanor asked. 6 months ago, I'd have said it was impractical. Now I think it might be the most important thing he could do." The transformation amazed their wealthy social circle. Charles redirected charitable giving toward community programs. Sebastian started a youth music initiative providing free instruments and lessons to housing project children. The family spent more time in community centers than exclusive events. "People think we've lost our minds," Charles told Eleanor. "Old friends act like we've joined a cult." Eleanor laughed. "You've joined something more dangerous than a cult. You've joined a community where people value each other for who they are, not what they own. That's revolutionary in your world." 1 year later, the Whitmores hosted a different kind of dinner party. Instead of business associates, guests included Eleanor and her neighbors, families from Sebastian's music program, and community leaders their foundation now supported. Charles watched Eleanor navigate his penthouse with the same dignity she showed in her small apartment. She was equally comfortable discussing policy with a Supreme Court justice and helping a shy child from Sebastian's program feel welcome. "Mrs. Washington," the justice said, "I understand you inspired the Whitmore family's community initiatives." Eleanor smiled. "I didn't inspire anything. I just treated a lost child with kindness. Everything else was Charles and Sebastian choosing to see people they'd never noticed before." Sebastian, now confident beyond his years, circulated with his violin, playing requests and teaching musical concepts to fascinated children. His joy was unmistakable. "You know what's amazing?" Charles told Eleanor as they watched Sebastian perform. "A year ago, I thought success meant protecting Sebastian from the world and teaching him to compete. Now I understand real success means helping him serve the world and connect with it." Eleanor nodded. "That boy was always special. He just needed permission to be special in his own way." 2 years after that rainy afternoon, Sebastian's music program served over 3,000 children in 12 cities. Charles had restructured his charitable giving to fund grassroots programs designed by communities themselves rather than imposed from outside. But the most significant change was in Charles himself. The man who once measured success purely financially had learned to find meaning in relationships and community impact. "I have a confession," Charles told Eleanor during one Saturday visit. "When Sebastian first told me about you, I was terrified someone might try to take advantage of our wealth." "And now," Eleanor asked, "now I realize this neighborhood taught us something worth more than money, how to be genuinely happy. You gave us what we couldn't buy, understanding that wealth without purpose is meaningless, and real security comes from being part of a caring community." Eleanor smiled, watching Sebastian conduct an impromptu orchestra of children with donated instruments. "That boy changed our community too. These children now believe their dreams are possible, that there are people who will invest in their potential regardless of where they come from." The story became legend in both worlds, proof that meaningful connections can develop between people from different circumstances when they approach each other with open hearts. Eleanor Washington demonstrated that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in relationship richness, community depth, and the satisfaction of using your resources to lift others up. Sebastian's transformation from sheltered, anxious child to confident young man with clear purpose showed that privilege can serve rather than separate. Charles's journey from purely financial focus to community leadership proved it's never too late to reconnect with authentic values and discover that fulfillment comes from creating opportunities for others. The day Sebastian got lost and found Eleanor was the day 3 lives intersected to change their understanding of what matters. Eleanor's simple kindness toward a frightened child proved that profound revolutions begin not with grand gestures, but with one person treating another with dignity and love. Sometimes getting lost is the first step toward finding what you've been looking for all along. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.